The War Next Door, a tale of power, deception, and justice. The moment I opened my front door and saw two police officers standing beside that HOA queen with her self-satisfied smirk, I knew this day would either break me or make me. They had no clue that the shotguns they wanted to seize weren't just hunting gear. And they certainly didn't know I wasn't some random retiree they could bully. My name is David Larson, and this is the story of how Linda Carver turned my quiet life in Pinewood Grove into a battlefield and how she paid the ultimate price for it. Pinewood Grove, a tidy upscale neighborhood in Boise, Idaho, was the kind of place where folks waved at you while mowing their lawns and left you alone otherwise. I'd moved here 5 years ago, after retiring from a 15-year career as a Navy SEAL. Officially, I was a part-time wildlife photographer, driving a beat-up Chevy pickup loaded with camera gear, heading out for long weekends to capture Idaho's rugged beauty. Unofficially, I was a federal agent with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, working undercover to bust illegal wildlife trafficking rings across the Northwest. My neighbors saw a grizzled 55-year-old with a Nikon and a thermos of coffee. They didn't see the man tracking poachers through the Bitterroot Mountains. Trouble started 6 months ago when Linda Carver got elected president of the Pinewood Grove Homeowners Association. Linda was 38, recently fired from a property management firm for client disputes, and seemed to think running the HOA was her ticket to local fame. She was the type who wore neon pink leggings with a blazer to community meetings, like she was auditioning for a reality show. But it wasn't her wardrobe that set off my alarms. It was how she started cataloging everyone's lives when you left for work, what car you drove, who visited your house. She carried a clipboard like it was a badge of honor, jotting notes with the zeal of a private eye. My first run-in with Linda came on a crisp October afternoon. I was loading my tripod into the truck when she appeared at my driveway, her fake smile as bright as her pink leggings. "Hi there. I'm Linda Carver, your new HOA president," she said, like she was announcing a congressional candidacy. "I'm conducting a neighborhood audit to enhance safety and community standards." Her voice had that rehearsed cadence, like she'd memorized it from some leadership seminar. I nodded politely. "Good to meet you, Linda. I'm David. If you've got forms, just leave them in my mailbox." I turned to head inside, but she stepped closer, peering past me toward my garage. "I couldn't help but notice all that equipment," she said, her eyes narrowing. "Are you running a business out of your home? We have strict zoning rules about commercial activity." It wasn't a question, it was a probe. My training kicked in, warning me this wasn't just neighborly curiosity. "Just photography," I said, keeping my tone even. "I shoot wildlife, so I've got camping gear, some hunting rifles. Standard stuff." Her face lit up like she'd struck gold. She whipped out her phone and started typing. "Hunting rifles? In a family-friendly community like Pinewood." She looked up, her smile now predatory. "I hope you're aware we have strict policies on weapons storage to protect property values." Her tone wasn't about safety, it was personal. I felt my jaw tighten, but kept my cool. "All my firearms are registered and stored per federal regulations. No violations here." Linda tilted her head, like she was sizing me up for weaknesses. "Of course, I'm sure it's all legal. I just like to stay proactive about safety." She stepped back and started snapping photos of my house with her phone, not even pretending to be subtle. "Just documenting for our safety audit. You understand." She didn't care if I understood. She was building a case, and I was her target. The next morning, an official-looking letter slid under my door, printed on Pinewood Grove HOA letterhead. Linda demanded I surrender my firearms for an HOA inspection, as if she had the authority of a sheriff. The letter hinted at community safety concerns and property value risks if I didn't comply. It was bold, audacious, and completely over the line. Most people would have taken weeks to escalate to this level, but Linda had gone from nosy neighbor to full-on harassment in 24 hours. I spent the day digging into Linda's background. A quick search showed she'd been fired from her last job for persistent conflicts with clients. Her LinkedIn was a mess, short stints at 3 companies in 4 years, each job briefer than the last. Her social media screamed desperation for relevance, with posts about taking charge and showing what real leadership looks like. One post from 2 weeks earlier caught my eye. "Some residents don't get community standards. I'm ready to take action to protect our values." The comments showed she'd already clashed with neighbors, including a woman named Susan Hayes, who wrote, "Leadership serves, not controls." Linda's reply was a string of angry faces and a jab about ignorant residents. I decided to hold off on responding to her letter. Let her stew. Instead, I watched the neighborhood. Linda was making rounds, stopping at certain houses repeatedly. I spotted two recruits, an older guy across the street, snapping photos of my truck whenever I loaded gear, and a woman who suddenly needed to walk her dog past my house 4 times a day, phone always out. It was amateur surveillance, but it showed Linda was strategic. She was building an army. That evening, Linda escalated again. She showed up with a nervous-looking man in his 60s, introducing himself as Tom Wheeler, the HOA treasurer. Linda wore a blazer over those pink leggings, like she thought it made her official. "Mr. Larson, we're here about your response to our safety notice," she said, clutching a folder of what I assumed were more fake legal papers. Tom looked like he'd rather be golfing. "I haven't responded yet," I said, deliberately slow. Linda's eye twitched. "We're trying to be reasonable, but safety is our priority. Residents are concerned about military-grade weapons in our neighborhood." I almost laughed at military-grade, but stayed calm. "They're hunting rifles, legally owned, properly stored." Tom tried to soften things. "Maybe you could show us your storage setup, just to ease minds." Linda shot him a look that shut him up. "Mr. Wheeler, we've set our position. Mr. Larson needs to comply within the timeline." She turned to me, her smile strained. "It's a simple inspection to meet community standards." Time to push back. "I'm not comfortable with non-law enforcement inspecting my property. If you've got concerns, call the authorities." Linda's face reddened. "We are the authorities here, Mr. Larson. The HOA has broad powers to protect safety and property values." Her voice rose, and Tom shifted uncomfortably. "Actually, Linda," I said quietly, "HOAs cover common areas and aesthetics, not personal property inside homes." Her mouth opened, then closed, like a fish out of water. She hadn't expected resistance grounded in law. After they left, I watched Linda pace my driveway, making heated phone calls, gesturing at my house. Tom slunk away, clearly regretting his involvement. Linda was committed now to either win or burn everything down trying. Based on her history, I bet on the latter. But I also knew desperate people are dangerous, and Linda was about to get very desperate. The next morning, I heard car doors slam in my driveway. Through the window, I saw a police cruiser parked behind Linda's rusty Toyota. My pulse spiked. This wasn't just harassment anymore, she was interfering with my federal operation. When I opened the door, Officer Ryan Mitchell stood there, young and visibly uncomfortable. Linda hovered behind him, pink leggings glowing, phone out to record what she thought would be my downfall. "Good morning, sir," Officer Mitchell said. "We've had reports of weapons violations and suspicious behavior at this address. I need to ask some questions and possibly look around." Linda tried to follow us inside, but Mitchell stopped her, which clearly infuriated her. She stationed herself outside my window, watching like a hawk. Inside, I showed Mitchell my photography gear and firearms paperwork. "What exactly prompted this?" I asked. He shifted, embarrassed. "Reports of military-style weapons and surveillance activity." I suppressed a chuckle at Linda's imagination me telephoto lenses as spy gear. Time for a calculated move. "Officer, I'm a 15-year Navy SEAL vet. I take firearms safety seriously." His posture relaxed instantly. "Military service carries weight." "What do you do now?" he asked. "Wildlife photography, some government contracts. Keeps me outdoors after years in war zones." It was true enough to hold up. By the time we finished, Mitchell knew Linda's complaint was nonsense. Outside, Linda was pacing, furious her plan wasn't working. "What about the military weapons?" she shrieked. "The surveillance equipment?" Mitchell stayed professional. "Ma'am, Mr. Larson has standard rifles and professional camera gear. Everything's legal." Linda exploded, arguing he hadn't searched thoroughly enough. Neighbors started peeking out, drawn to the drama. "You're not taking this seriously," she yelled. "He's a threat." Mitchell's patience thinned. "Ma'am, I've investigated. If you have evidence of illegal activity, file a formal complaint." Linda stepped in front of his cruiser, blocking it. "I'm not letting you leave until you search his house." Her voice was hysterical. Mitchell's radio crackled, and I saw him weighing whether to call backup. "Ma'am, step away, or I'll consider this interference." The threat of arrest snapped her back briefly, but as she moved, she spun toward me. "This isn't over, David. I know what you're hiding, and I'll expose you." Her voice echoed, pure venom. That evening, Susan Hayes knocked on my door, holding a plate of brownies and looking furious. "David, I'm sorry about today's circus," she said. "Linda's done this before. She targeted the Martinez family over their kid's basketball hoop, recorded them yelling, and used it to call them unstable." Susan lowered her voice. "She's planning something bigger for you. She told Mrs. Thompson you're just the start she wants to clean up Pinewood, starting with dangerous people like you." Susan's warning hit hard. Linda wasn't just after Mesh was building a reign of terror, using me as a test case. "She's recruiting," Susan added, showing me texts. "Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Garcia by the parks got them in her community safety initiative, saying police won't protect us, so we have to act." The idea of Linda forming a vigilante squad was chilling. As Susan left, she turned back. "David, after today's flop with the cop, she'll go nuclear. Whatever you're really doing here, be ready." Susan was right. Linda didn't just escalate, she declared psychological war. Linda Carver's humiliation in front of Officer Mitchell didn't slow her down, it lit a fuse. Within 48 hours, she transformed her harassment into a full-blown campaign to make my life in Pinewood Grove a living nightmare. What started as nosy questions and fake letters morphed into something darker, more calculated. She wasn't just after me anymore, she wanted to break me, to drive me out of Boise entirely. But Linda had no idea who she was dealing with, and her obsession was about to pull her into a trap of her own making. The morning after the police visit, I woke to a flood of notifications from the Pinewood Grove neighborhood app. Linda had unleashed a barrage of safety alerts about me, complete with photos of my Chevy pickup and blurry shots of my camera gear taken through my windows. "Suspicious activity at 1427 Aspen Lane," one post read. "Resident David Larson exhibits patterns of behavior inconsistent with community standards, including possession of dangerous weapons and surveillance equipment." She'd crafted a timeline of my comings and goings, speculating I was planning something that threatened the neighborhood. It was unhinged, but it worked. Neighbors who'd once nodded hello now avoided my gaze. Linda didn't stop at social media. She'd recruited a community safety team, a handful of neighbors who traded their spines for a spot in her inner circle. Mrs. Thompson, the older woman across the street, started logging every car that parked near my house, scribbling license plates in a notebook. Mr. Garcia, who lived by the park, took to mowing his lawn whenever I stepped outside, his phone always ready to record. They worked in shifts, ensuring I was watched from dawn to dusk. It was amateurish but relentless, and even for a former SEAL, the constant scrutiny wore on me. I found myself double-checking federal protocols, worried their clumsy surveillance might accidentally expose my wildlife trafficking investigation. 3 days into Linda's campaign, things took a sinister turn. I returned from a quick trip to the mountains, actually a recon mission for my casito, find my front lawn trashed. Garbage was strewn everywhere, but it wasn't just my trash. Mixed in were empty ammo boxes I'd never owned, printed photos of assault rifles I'd never seen, and a fake business card for Larson Security Solutions, a company that didn't exist. Linda was planting evidence to bolster her narrative that I was some kind of armed menace. The sophistication of it unnerved me. This wasn't just a power trip anymore, she was crossing into criminal territory. That evening, my neighbor Mike Reynolds, a retired attorney, appeared at my fence, looking rattled. "David, we need to talk," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Linda came to my house with a folder of evidence about you. Asked if I thought you were a danger to kids in the neighborhood." I felt a chill. When I told her she was out of line, she started talking about taking matters into her own hands if the police wouldn't act. Mike leaned closer, his voice low. "She's been asking about citizens' arrest laws and whether the HOA can detain suspicious residents. Said she's contacting a private security firm to investigate you." The implications hit hard. Linda wasn't just spreading lies, she was flirting with illegal detention or worse. My federal cover was at risk, and so was my safety. "She's losing it," Mike added. "Her folder had photos, timelines, even notes on your trash. It's obsessive." I thanked him and spent the night reviewing my security footage. At 3:17 a.m. 2 nights earlier, a figure in dark clothing had tried picking my garage lock. My cameras caught enough to show it wasn't a random thief. Linda's Toyota was parked down the street minutes later. When I reported the break-in attempt to the police, the officer noted they'd had multiple calls about suspicious activity at my address. all from Linda's number. The next afternoon brought the confrontation I'd been bracing for. I was loading my camera gear when Linda marched up my driveway with two men I didn't recognize. One was in his 50s, ex-military by his posture, with a clipped way of speaking. The other, younger, had the slick look of a private investigator, complete with a notepad. "David Larson," Linda announced, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "We need to discuss your activities and their impact on community safety." The older man stepped forward. "I'm John Kessler, representing the Pinewood Safety Committee. We've received complaints about potential illegal activities at this address and are conducting an independent investigation." It was a power play. Linda had hired professionals to give her vendetta legitimacy. But these weren't her bumbling neighbors. Kessler's eyes scanned my property like he was casing a target, and the investigator was already jotting notes. If they dug too deep, my cover could unravel. I kept my voice steady. "I'm not sure what committee you're referring to, but my firearms are legal, and my photography is my job. If you've got concerns, take them to the police." Linda's face twisted with frustration. "We've already done that, and they didn't take it seriously. This is about protecting our community." Kessler cut in, his tone colder. "We'd like to inspect your equipment and storage. It's a reasonable request to address resident concerns." I crossed my arms. "No inspection without a warrant. You're not law enforcement." The investigator smirked, but Kessler's jaw tightened. Linda, sensing her moment slipping, jumped in. "You're hiding something, David, and we're going to find out what." Her voice was shrill, drawing stares from neighbors. I leaned forward slightly. "Linda, you're overstepping. Keep this up, and you'll regret it." It was a warning, not a threat, but her eyes flashed with defiance. "We'll see who regrets it," she spat, and the trio stormed off. That night, I called my federal supervisor, briefing him on the escalating situation. "This woman's a problem," he said. "Document everything, but don't blow your cover unless you have to. We're close to cracking this trafficking ring." I agreed, but Linda's hired muscle worried me. If she'd brought in pros, my operation was in jeopardy. I installed extra cameras and started sleeping with my service pistol closer than usual. The next week was a blur of psychological warfare. Linda's team ramped up their surveillance, with neighbors now photographing my mail and delivery packages. The app exploded with her posts, each more unhinged than the last. "David Larson seen leaving at 4 a.m. Where is he going?" One read, with a grainy photo of me heading to a stakeout. She shared zoomed-in shots of my telephoto lenses, calling them spying tools. The pressure was relentless, and even my SEAL training couldn't fully shield me from the stress. I started questioning every move, wondering if I'd slipped up and exposed my mission. Then came the bombshell. Susan Hayes texted me late one night with a screenshot from the app. Linda had posted a call to action, urging residents to stand up to the threat in our midst. She'd included a doctored photo of my truck with what looked like a rifle case in the bed, except I hadn't carried a case in weeks. Comments poured in, some neighbors buying her story, others calling her out. "This is too far, Linda," Susan wrote. Linda's reply was chilling. "If you're not with us, you're against us." She was dividing the neighborhood, turning it into her personal fiefdom. Mike Reynolds stopped by again, his face grim. "David, Linda's telling people you're a domestic terrorist. She's got a meeting planned with her safety committee to discuss next steps." I overheard her mention removing you from Pinewood. My stomach sank. Removing could mean anything from eviction to something far worse. "She's also been asking about your military background," Mike added. "Says it makes you dangerous." I thanked him and spent the night prepping for the worst. Linda was spiraling, and I knew her next move would force my hand. The following morning, I spotted an unfamiliar van parked across the street. Two men inside were watching my house, one with binoculars. They weren't Linda's usual recruits. These guys looked like hired muscle. My phone buzzed with a new app post from Linda. "Update. Professional investigators are assisting our efforts to ensure community safety. Stay vigilant." She'd gone all in, and the stakes were now life or death. I couldn't stay passive any longer. That afternoon, as I checked my cameras, I caught footage of Linda herself creeping around my backyard at 2 a.m. the previous night, dropping what looked like more fake evidencia plastic bag with shell casings. She was desperate to frame me, and her recklessness was my opening. I saved the footage, knowing it could bury her. But before I could act, Linda made her fatal mistake. The sound of car doors slamming woke me at 7 a.m. Peering through my blinds. I saw a sheriff's cruiser, an unmarked sedan, and Linda's Toyota in my driveway. She was there, pink leggings and all, bouncing with excitement. Phone out to record what she thought would be my arrest. My heart pounded not from fear, but from the realization that my cover was about to blow. Linda had crossed a line she couldn't uncross, and I was done playing defense. Deputy Sarah Torres knocked, her face professional but tense. A detective stood beside her, holding a search warrant. "Mr. Larson, we've had multiple reports of weapons violations and suspicious activity. We need to discuss and possibly search your premises." I took a deep breath. Maintaining my cover was no longer an option. Linda's word had forced me to show my cards. "Deputy Torres," I said, reaching for my badge. "I need to show you something that changes everything." The air in my living room felt heavy as I handed Deputy Sarah Torres my federal badge. Her eyes widened, and the detective beside her, a grizzled man named Carter, leaned in to inspect it. Outside, Linda Carver stood in my driveway, her pink leggings glowing under the Boise morning sun, phone raised to capture what she thought would be my downfall. She had no idea the trap she'd sprung was about to snap shut on her. "My name is David Larson." And this was the moment Pinewood Grove's self-appointed tyrant learned she'd picked a fight with a federal agent. "I'm Special Agent David Larson with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I've been working undercover for 16 months, investigating illegal wildlife trafficking in the Northwest. The firearms and equipment you're here to inspect are federal property, part of an active case." Deputy Torres's face shifted from professional neutrality to alarm. Carter's jaw tightened, and he muttered, "This is bad." Linda's relentless campaign, her fake evidence, her hired investigators, her false police reports had just collided with a federal operation, and the fallout was going to be catastrophic. Torres took a step back, clutching my badge. "I need to verify this with your superiors immediately. If this is legit, we've got a serious problem." She glanced at Carter, who nodded and pulled out his phone. I gestured toward the window, where Linda was still filming, oblivious to the shift. "Ms. Carver's harassment has been documented for months. Her actions, including today, are interfering with a federal investigation." Torres's eyes narrowed. "Understood. Stay here." She stepped outside to make calls, leaving Carter to guard the door. Through the blinds, I watched Linda's demeanor change. Her smug grin faltered as Torres spoke to her, gesturing sharply for her to lower her phone. Linda's head shook furiously, her voice rising, though I couldn't make out the words. Neighbors were gathering now, drawn by the police presence and Linda's escalating tantrum. Mrs. Thompson, her loyal spy, stood at her mailbox, notebook in hand, looking confused. Mr. Garcia lingered by his fence, phone down for once. The neighborhood was waking up to the spectacle, and Linda was unraveling in real time. Carter broke the silence. "If your credentials check out, Larson, this woman's in deep. Filing false reports is one thing, messing with a federal op? That's a whole other level." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "She's been planting evidence, hiring investigators, even tried breaking into my garage. I've got footage." Carter whistled low. "You've been patient. Most guys would have lost it by now." I shrugged. "Patience is part of the job, but she's pushed me to the edge." Within 20 minutes, Torres returned, her face grim. "Your section chief confirmed everything. You're legit, Agent Larson. On behalf of the sheriff's department, I apologize. We were acting on bad information." She hesitated, glancing toward Linda, who was now pacing frantically, arguing with a second deputy who'd arrived. "Ms. Carver's complaints are baseless, and her actions may have compromised your work. We'll need to address that." I leaned forward. "Her campaign's been systematic surveillance, fake evidence, recruiting neighbors. She's not just after me. She's terrorizing the whole neighborhood." Torres nodded, jotting notes. "We'll take your statement and any evidence you've got. This is going to the DA." She stepped outside, and I followed to the porch, watching as she approached Linda. The moment Torres explained the situation, Linda's world collapsed. "He's lying," she screamed, her voice carrying across Pinewood Grove. "He's not a federal agent. He's a fraud." She pointed at me, her face red, pink leggings clashing with her disheveled blazer. "You have to believe me. I've been protecting this community." Torres remained calm, but her tone was steel. "Ma'am, We verified his credentials. Your reports were false, and you've interfered with a federal operation. Step back to your vehicle." Linda's eyes darted wildly, landing on the growing crowd of neighbors. "This is a conspiracy," she shrieked. "He's been watching us all. He's the danger." The irony wasn't lost on Mesh was describing her own behavior, projecting her obsession onto me. Her mascara streaked as she started sobbing, her authoritative facade crumbling into a mess of desperation. As the deputies prepared to leave, Linda made a final, desperate move. She ran toward my house, ignoring Torres's orders, and pounded on my door. "David, you can't do this. You're lying." "I know you are." Her voice was raw, broken. Carter intercepted her, guiding her back to the driveway with a firm grip. "Ma'am, you're done here," he said. Linda stood alone as the cruisers pulled away, staring at me with a mix of rage and disbelief. The neighborhood was silent, dozens of eyes watching from windows and porches. Her reign was over, and she was starting to realize it. That evening, I met with Mike Reynolds, the retired attorney who'd warned me about Linda's plans. He was practically giddy when I told him about my federal status. "David, this is a gold mine," he said, leaning across his kitchen table. "With your credentials public, we can hit her with federal civil rights violations, harassment, defamation, and obstruction of justice. We're talking criminal charges and a civil suit that'll bankrupt her." His eyes gleamed with the thrill of a lawyer handed a slam-dunk case. "We can set a precedent to protect other neighborhoods from this kind of abuse." I agreed, and Mike got to work. Within 48 hours, he drafted a federal lawsuit demanding Linda's removal from the HOA, $60,000 in damages for lost investigation time, equipment damage, and emotional distress, plus a permanent restraining order. We also filed criminal complaints with the district attorney, and federal prosecutors reached out, interested in obstruction charges. Linda was about to face the full weight of the system she'd tried to manipulate, and she didn't see it coming. But before the legal hammer dropped, Linda's world started imploding naturally. Word of my federal status spread like wildfire through Pinewood Grove. Neighbors who'd been too scared to speak out began sharing their own stories of Linda's tyranny. Susan Hayes organized a Pinewood Justice Group, a coalition of residents compiling complaints against Linda. The neighborhood app, once her propaganda tool, turned against her. Posts flooded in. She fined me $200 for my mailbox color. She called CPS on my kids for playing in the yard. Linda's credibility was gone, and every frantic post she made claiming I was abusing federal power only dug her deeper. The most satisfying blow came from an unexpected source. Linda's husband, Greg, a night shift nurse who'd been largely absent during her crusade, was served legal papers at his hospital. According to Susan, he was mortified to learn his wife had been terrorizing neighbors, filing false reports, entangling with federal law enforcement while he paid the bills. Greg moved out within a week, filing for divorce and citing irreconcilable differences and legal liability. Linda's personal life was collapsing as fast as her public persona, and the speed of it was breathtaking. Linda tried to fight back, posting rambling defenses on the app, but they were incoherent. "The government is silencing me for speaking truth," one read, followed by a blurry photo of my badge she'd somehow gotten. Her pink leggings and blazer, once quirky, now screamed instability. The IRS took notice when Susan's group reported Linda had misused HOA funds for her investigations, and the state attorney general launched a probe into HOA abuses, using her as a case study. Linda was drowning, and every move she made pulled her under faster. Her final gambit came a week later. I was in my garage when I heard a timid knock. Opening the door, I found Linda standing there, a shadow of her former self. No blazer, no clipboard, just a rumpled sweatshirt, red eyes, and a trembling voice. "David, please," she sobbed. "I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Can't we just end this?" Her desperation was palpable, but I'd seen her playbook. She'd shown no mercy when she had power, and now she wanted it because she was cornered. "Linda," I said, my voice calm but firm, "you had months to back off. You chose to harass me, plant evidence, and endanger my work. You hurt families here, people who couldn't fight back. Now you face consequences." Her sobs grew louder, but I pressed on. "You taught me about power and accountability. Now you'll learn it, and it's going to cost you everything." She stumbled back, tears streaming, and left without another word. When her lawyer called later, begging for a settlement, Mike delivered my response. No mercy, just like she'd shown none. The neighborhood began to heal, but Linda's shadow lingered. Residents were wary, still processing how one woman had held them hostage. I knew the legal fight was just beginning, but with every neighbor's story, every piece of evidence, we were building an airtight case. Linda had declared war on the wrong man, and now she'd face a reckoning that would echo far beyond Pinewood Grove. The quiet of Pinewood Grove was deceptive in the weeks following Linda Carver's meltdown in my driveway. The neighborhood app had gone silent, and the once constant surveillance by her community safety team had vanished. But I knew better than to think Linda's defeat was complete. People like her don't just slink away, they double down or collapse entirely. With my federal status now public and a lawsuit looming, Linda was cornered, and cornered animals are dangerous. My name is David Larson, and this is how Pinewood Grove's tyrant faced the consequences of her war against me and how justice reshaped our community. Mike Reynolds, my attorney neighbor, was relentless. By mid-November, he'd filed a federal lawsuit that was a legal masterpiece, outlining every step of Linda's campaign. The false police reports, the planted evidence, the hired investigators, the psychological warfare. We demanded $60,000 in damages for my compromised investigation, equipment damage, legal fees, and emotional distress. We also sought Linda's immediate removal from the HOA, a permanent restraining order, and criminal charges for obstruction of justice and harassment. The district attorney was already building a case, and federal prosecutors were circling, intrigued by the interference with my wildlife trafficking operation. The neighborhood rallied behind us. Susan Hayes's Pinewood Justice Group grew, with over 20 residents documenting their own run-ins with Linda. The Martinez family shared how she'd find them repeatedly for their kids' basketball hoop, driving them to sell their home. The Wilsons recounted her threats to call animal control over their dogs barking. Each story painted a picture of a woman who'd weaponized her HOA role to control and terrorize. Susan compiled the evidence into a 50-page report, which Mike included in our filings. "This isn't just about you, David," Susan said one evening, her eyes fierce. "It's about making sure no one else suffers like we did." Linda's attempts at damage control were pathetic. She posted rambling videos on the neighborhood app, claiming she was a victim of government overreach. In one, she wore her signature pink leggings, her voice cracking as she accused me of using my badge to silence free speech. The comments were brutal. Neighbors called her delusional, demanding she resign. Her credibility was ashes, and every post added fuel to our case. When the IRS launched an audit into her misuse of HOA funds, $3,000 spent on safety initiatives, like her private investigators, the state attorney general took notice, citing her as a prime example of HOA abuse. The personal toll on Linda was swift and merciless. Her husband, Greg, finalized their divorce by December, taking their house and most assets. Linda's legal debts made it impossible for her to keep any property. She moved into a dingy apartment complex on the edge of Boise, a far cry from Pinewood's manicured lawns. Susan heard through the grapevine that Linda was working as a cashier at a gas station, a job that avoided background checks. Her fall from self-proclaimed queen to social pariah was complete, but the legal system wasn't done with her. In January, I sat in Judge Margaret Ellis's federal courtroom, watching Linda face the music. The courtroom was packed. Local media had latched onto the story, dubbing it the HOA tyrant case. A court TV reporter scribbled notes, drawn by the rare angle of a federal agent targeted by a suburban dictator. Linda sat at the defendant's table, dressed in a plain gray suit. Her lawyer had clearly chosen to make her look contrite, but her fidgeting hands and darting eyes betrayed her. Judge Ellis, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, had a reputation for zero tolerance for civil rights violations, and her expression as she reviewed our evidence was grim. Mike called witnesses to paint a vivid picture. Susan testified about Linda's pattern of intimidation, presenting the Pinewood Justice Group's report. The Martinez family recounted their forced move, their voices breaking. I took the stand, detailing how Linda's actions had jeopardized my investigation, forcing me to divert resources to protect my cover. I played the security footage of her sneaking around my backyard, dropping fake evidence. The courtroom gasped as the grainy video showed her pink leggings glowing under my floodlights. Mike's timeline was damning, showing how Linda's harassment escalated from nosy questions to criminal acts. Judge Ellis's ruling was a hammer blow. "Ms. Carver," she said, her voice cutting through the room, "your actions represent a grotesque abuse of authority. You systematically violated your neighbor's rights, harassed an innocent man, and endangered a federal operation for your own ego." She paused, letting the words sink in. "This court finds your conduct not only reckless, but malicious." Linda's shoulders slumped, her face pale. The financial judgment was crushing. Linda was ordered to pay me $62,000, covering investigation losses, equipment damage, legal fees, and emotional distress. Additional damages to other neighbors, including the Martinezes and Wilsons, brought her total liability to $90,000, a sum she'd never recover from. A permanent restraining order barred her from contacting me or interfering with my work, and she was banned from HOA leadership for 25 years. The criminal charges were even harsher. Linda pleaded guilty to multiple misdemeanors for false reports and harassment, plus a federal felony for obstruction of justice. She was sentenced to 20 months in federal prison, 3 years of probation, and hefty fines. As Linda was let out, her eyes met mine for a fleeting moment. There was no defiance left, just defeat. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, but I felt no satisfaction, only relief. The fight had been grueling, and while Linda's destruction was complete, the scars she'd left on Pinewood Grove lingered. Back in the neighborhood, change came quickly. The HOA board was dissolved and rebuilt with new leadership focused on transparency and fairness. I was elected president by a unanimous vote, a role I accepted reluctantly but saw as a chance to heal. Our first act was a residents' rights charter, ensuring no future HOA could target individuals as Linda had. It outlined clear boundaries: no surveillance, no personal property inspections, no fines without due process. Neighbors who'd been silent during Linda's reign started speaking up, sharing ideas for community events instead of safety audits. One crisp spring morning, I drove through downtown Boise and spotted a familiar figure pushing a cleaning cart toward an office building. Linda, in a faded pink sweatshirt, looked older, her shoulders hunched. She glanced up as my truck passed, and the flicker of recognition in her eyes was raw shame, regret, and a hint of fear. I didn't slow down. Her downfall was her own doing, and I had a neighborhood to rebuild. The irony of Linda's campaign wasn't lost on me. Her obsessive documentation photos, timelines, even her app posts had inadvertently captured evidence of 3 Pinewood residents tied to the trafficking ring I was investigating. Their comings and goings, recorded by her spies, helped my team build airtight cases. When we busted the ring 6 months later, seizing $2 million in illegal pelts and horns, I received a commendation from the Fish and Wildlife Service director. Linda's war had nearly derailed my mission, but in the end, it handed me the keys to its success. As I settled into my role as HOA president, I reflected on the broader lesson. Linda's story wasn't just about one woman's ego, it was a warning about unchecked power, even in small places like an HOA. Pinewood Grove was peaceful again, filled with families who could plant gardens or park their boats without fear of a clipboard-wielding tyrant. But the fight had changed me, too. I'd always been a loner, content with my cover and my mission. Now, I saw the strength in community, in neighbors standing together against injustice. The sun rose over Pinewood Grove, casting a warm glow on the tidy lawns and blooming flower beds. It had been a year since Linda Carver's reign of terror ended in Judge Ellis's courtroom, and the neighborhood felt like a different world. Gone were the days of furtive glances and whispered conspiracies. Kids rode bikes down Aspen Lane, and neighbors chatted over fences without checking for Linda's pink leggings lurking nearby. My name is David Larson, and this is how Pinewood Grove reclaimed its soul and how I learned that justice, when fought for, can rebuild more than it destroys. As the new HOA president, I took my role seriously, determined to prevent another Linda Carver from ever taking root. The residents' rights charter we passed was a game changer. It set strict limits on HOA authority: no more safety audits, no fines without a transparent vote, and no surveillance of private property. We held monthly open forums where anyone could voice concerns, from mailbox colors to streetlight repairs. The first meeting drew a crowd, with folks like Susan Hayes and Mike Reynolds leading discussions on community gardens and block parties. Pinewood wasn't just healing, it was thriving. My federal work continued, though I kept a lower profile after the public exposure of my cover. The wildlife trafficking bust, bolstered by Linda's unintentional evidence, had ripple effects. We dismantled a network spanning 3 states, leading to 12 arrests and the rescue of endangered species worth millions on the black market. My commendation hung on my office wall, a quiet reminder that even the worst battles could yield unexpected victories. But the real reward was seeing Pinewood Grove's families live without fear, free to be themselves. Linda's downfall, meanwhile, was a cautionary tale whispered across Boise. After her release from federal prison serving 18 of her 20 months for good behavior, she faded into obscurity. The last I heard, she was working nights cleaning a warehouse, a job that kept her isolated and far from any position of power. Her divorce left her with nothing but debts, and the $90,000 in court-ordered damages ensured she'd never recover financially. The pink leggings were gone, replaced by a life of anonymity and regret. When neighbors mentioned her, it was with a mix of pity and relief, a reminder of what happens when ego overrides decency. The legal precedent we set resonated beyond Pinewood. The state attorney general's probe into HOA abuses, sparked by Linda's case, led to new Idaho regulations. HOAs now faced stricter oversight, with mandatory training for board members and clear penalties for harassment. Local news ran stories about the Pinewood precedent, and I got calls from other neighborhoods seeking advice on ousting their own mini-tyrants. Mike Reynolds, ever the lawyer, turned our case into a passion project, offering pro bono help to residents fighting HOA overreach. "This is bigger than us, David," he said one evening over coffee. "We're giving people their homes back." The neighborhood's transformation wasn't just structural, it was personal. The Martinezes, who'd sold their home under Linda's pressure, visited for a block party, their kids laughing as they shot hoops with new residents. The Wilsons, once targeted for their dog, hosted a barbecue, their lab bounding happily. Susan Hayes became the HOA's vice president, her calm pragmatism balancing my military precision. We weren't just neighbors anymore. We were a community forged in the fire of Linda's war. One summer evening, as I sat on my porch with a beer, Susan stopped by, her eyes thoughtful. "You ever think about what made Linda snap?" she asked. I took a sip, considering. Power, I think. She had none in her real life, fired, struggling, invisible. The HOA gave her a throne, and she couldn't resist abusing it. Susan nodded. "Makes you wonder how many Lindas are out there, waiting for their chance." It was a sobering thought, but it fueled my resolve to keep Pinewood safe. The final twist in the saga came unexpectedly. During a routine review of my investigation files, I found an overlooked detail. One of Linda's app posts, a photo of my truck, had captured a license plate tied to a trafficking suspect we'd missed. That lead cracked open a new branch of the case, leading to 2 more arrests. I couldn't help but chuckle. Linda, in her blind obsession, had been my unwitting partner. When I shared the story with Mike, he laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. "She'd hate knowing she helped you," he said. "Let's keep that one quiet." As I write this, Pinewood Grove is a place of peace and possibility. My photography cover remains, though I'm more open about my federal work when asked. Neighbors wave when I load my Chevy with camera gear, no longer suspicious of my mountain trips. The HOA runs smoothly, focused on pothole repairs and holiday lights, not power trips. I've even started mentoring a local kid who's into photography, teaching him to frame Idaho's wild beauty through a lens. Looking back, the fight with Linda was more than a personal victory. It was a stand for everyone who's ever been bullied by someone with a little power and a big ego. Linda thought she could control Pinewood Grove, but she underestimated its people. We fought back, not with her tactics of fear and lies, but with truth, unity, and the law. That's the lesson I carry. Justice isn't just about punishing the guilty. It's about building something better in their wake. Standing on my lawn, watching kids play and neighbors laugh, I feel a quiet pride. Pinewood Grove isn't just a place, it's a testament to what happens when good people refuse to bow. Linda Carver's war is over, and we won. The scars remain, but they're fading, replaced by the strength of a community that knows its worth. This story of power, deception, and justice raises big questions about bullying and fairness in our lives. Have you ever faced a Linda in your community, a petty tyrant abusing their authority? How did you handle it? Do you think David's approach patience, evidence, and legal action was the right way? Or should he have confronted her sooner? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's debate. How do we stop injustice without losing ourselves in the fight? Your voice matters. Join the conversation.